How do you select a motherboard?
Hi, I'm Paul, this is Diane, and we're the PC Zombies. And today we're going to tell you how to select a motherboard for a custom PC build. Now in today's discussion, I'm going to refer to some other videos from time to time. If you're curious about any of these, please click on the info of this video and I'll have links to all the other references.
Maybe you should give us an overview of a motherboard.
That's not a bad idea. I'll give you a real quick one. A motherboard contains the guts of your PC. It contains your CPU. It's not built in. The motherboard has a socket which the CPU plugs into, and that's how the CPU ends up on your motherboard. But it also contains slots where you can plug your memory in, slots where you can plug your graphics card in. It has a bunch of connectors in the back that end up pointing right outside of your PC, and that's what you're plugging in your USB, you're plugging in your Wi-Fi antenna, you're plugging in your Ethernet, things like that. Your audio connectors, all those are on the back of the motherboard and set up so that they actually are on the back of your PC case when it's all put together.
So what's the first step in selecting a motherboard?
Select your CPU by watching our other video. And if you follow that process, you'll end up with a list of the features and specifications, the key specifications of your CPU. Once you know that, you can then start picking out a motherboard. The top CPU specification that you need is what is the socket that the CPU is going to need to fit into on your motherboard to work with your motherboard. You can't buy any motherboards but the ones that work with your CPU. Now the socket is going to say something like FCLGA 1700. What does that mean? Nobody knows. It's made up. No. FC means flip chip. Flip chip means your CPU is actually manufactured so that the part that gets hottest is facing away from the motherboard so that you could put a cooler on top of it and draw that heat away from the chip so you can then run the CPU faster. Because to run a CPU faster, you have to give it more power, and more power means more heat. The LGA means land grid array. It basically means it's a square of pins. In this case, 1,700 pins.
Holy cow.
That's why we call it FC LGA 1700. 1,700 traces that go to memory, they go to the PCI lanes, they go to SATA, they go to the USB, they go all over the place. And you want to get the kind of motherboard that supports that socket.
What's the second thing you do when selecting a motherboard?
Okay, the second thing you do is you watch our other video, what's slowing my PC down. And that way you learn what's going wrong with your current PC so you can make sure your new PC will go faster. And from that, you're going to get some very specific requirements of your motherboard. Some of those requirements are already used to pick your CPU, but some affect your motherboard as well. In particular, you're going to find out if you need a graphics card that's more powerful than the one you already have. And if you're going for really super powerful, you're going to want a motherboard that can support that and is big enough for that. The other thing you're going to learn is if you need to overclock your memory or your CPU. This makes your CPU run faster, and if you're having a problem where you need faster CPU, not more cores, then this is going to affect your motherboard, because some motherboards allow overclocking and some don't. And if you are overclocking, you're going to need a very high-end motherboard to handle the electrical connections coming into the CPU to make sure it's clean current coming in. You don't want any risk of, when you're going that fast, a power glitch causing it to crash. And finally, you're going to also need to know if you have a hard drive or external storage problem. If you're having a problem with your storage being too slow or not enough, and you decide you want to go to an SSD solution, you may need M.2 connectors directly on the motherboard to put multiple SSDs into your motherboard. And so you want to make sure your motherboard supports that and how many they support.
What's the third thing?
Are you going to be water cooling? Because if you are, you might need a bigger case. And I guess if there was a second requirement, it would be maybe you have a requirement for a small case, in which case you probably aren't going to be water cooling, because if you're water cooling, you're going to need a radiator, you're going to need some extra fans, and that's going to require more space.
And is there a fourth thing?
Yeah, the fourth thing is you want to pick the size of the case. So we now know all the requirements, we know what's going to affect the size of the case. So let's talk a little bit about that. When you're picking a motherboard, you get to pick from multiple different sizes. And the size of the case starts at ATX. An ATX is a normal PC, a normal case. It's got a normal kind of a size to it that we're kind of used to. We've been seeing them for decades. If you want to do a really small case, you can go all the way down to a Mini ITX. That's going to be very tiny. A little bit bigger is a micro ATX. Both the Mini and the micro are small enough cases that you are going to have very limited what you could put inside of it. But the motherboards today are surprisingly powerful. They might even have, if you go to the right brand and get the right motherboard, you'll have things for RGB headers, fan headers, You'll have slots for your graphics cards. You'll have memory slots, probably only 2. But you'd be amazed how much they're able to put on those small motherboards nowadays. What these small motherboards won't have is a lot of VRMs, voltage regulator module. And VRMs are actually real important for clean, efficient power supply to your CPU. So when you got the really tiny motherboards, you tend to run with a little bit slower CPUs, so you're not pushing it and a little glitch here and there and the power won't be a problem. So when you get a bigger motherboard, you tend to have a lot more, maybe twice as many or even 3 times as many VRMs. Jumping up to a bigger motherboard, an ATX or an extended ATX, means a bigger case, all right? So the smaller motherboards means you get smaller cases, which is kind of nice. But if you can accept a bigger case, now what you get is you can have more M.2 SSDs on the motherboard, which means more power, because you want those SSDs connected right straight to the CPU or to the chipset if it's possible. The other thing it does is you can have more memory. Oftentimes you have 4 slots instead of just 2 slots with the ATX or eATX motherboards. And there's one other thing you might find in the bigger motherboards that I know at least ASUS has, and that is water cooling of the VRM. So you can actually hook up your custom water loop right into the motherboard when it comes out the other side, and it goes across those VRMs and it cools those VRMs. It means faster CPUs, faster overclocking, and that's exciting.
What's the 5th thing you need to pick a motherboard?
Pick a chipset. Now this is a little bit complicated, but it doesn't need to be. There's basically 2 series of chipsets that, for Intel at least, that you need to pick between. First of all, you say, what's a chipset?
What's a chipset?
Okay. You might think, oh, the chipset means there's a bunch of chips on your motherboard that implements the chipset. Well, that is how it used to be done, but now it's a single chip, and there are 2 series with Intel, so you need to pick one. Either the 700 series or the 600 series. The 600 series is affordable. The 700 series has more features. It has more efficient power handling, so it can handle the overclocking demands. So the chipset may also have fewer PCIe lanes or fewer USB connectors and things like that.
So are there several chipsets within the 600 series and the 700 series?
Yes, there are, but we're going to be building a PC. So in general, like today, the modern chipsets, you would probably pick between a 790 or a 690. Those are the only 2 you really need to know. And the 6th item to picking a motherboard is nothing to do with me. It's her problem.
Yeah, it's about looking good.
How do you make it look good?
Well, there's several ways. So the first thing you can do is the actual color of the motherboard. It can be either white or black, and white actually reflects color. So if you have RGB lighting, it's going to reflect colors that you have coming in.
Oh, that might make it actually more exciting.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, and black does kind of absorb light, so you're going to get less reflections and it's going to be harder to see what's going on. In fact, that's the case of our existing PCs, because we have black cases and black motherboards and black memory,
yes.
And we have RGB lights, but it still looks really dark in there.
Yes, and the second thing is you want the motherboard to support the RGB lighting.
Right, and this kind of falls on my lap because I'm the one who's going to probably have to figure out how to hook it all up. But if you go out and buy any random RGB fan or a random RGB strip of lights to put inside your case, then that's going to want to hook up into your motherboard at an RGB header or USB header. Most motherboards, even the little tiny ones nowadays, have USB and RGB headers. So just make sure you have that capability if you're going to make your computer look cool with lighting.
And the third thing is you actually may have lights built into your motherboard.
Yeah, and to tell that, what you pretty much have to do is go to the website of the manufacturer and look to see, does it have any lighting capabilities on the motherboard? I might see that, oh, this one has RGB lights built right in on the motherboard to make it shine. Now, I kind of just to let you know, I kind of think that if you're going to do this, you want to first think, am I going to put a big graphics card into my motherboard? Because if you do put a big graphics card into your motherboard, half your motherboard is going to be invisible unless you're staring at your computer like this.
Yeah.
So having lights down here isn't going to help much. And on the top, if you're going to have a water cooler and memory and all this other stuff, those lights on the motherboard probably aren't going to amount to much. But there is one thing you do want from your motherboard from a lighting perspective, and this is just me, this is not aesthetic, and that is you really want to have some way for the motherboard to communicate codes, error codes back to you, because you're going to be building this computer, and if the memory's not working or that something else isn't hooking up properly, the motherboard will try to tell you through codes. So at a minimum, you want like a little 2-digit output that you can read. Now, this is lighting in a way because it's lighting up.
But it's bright red.
Yeah, but it's real important to you as a builder that you have this. I mean, the lowest end motherboards don't have that, and they might just have LEDs that flash. and that's a hard way to build a computer.
And the fourth aesthetic thing that can make a computer look cool, Paul just showed me there's specialty motherboards you can get.
Right, I was up on the ASUS website, which by the way, I'm not sponsored by ASUS, I'm just a fan, all right? So, but I was up there on their website and I was looking at some high-end motherboards when I'm picking out for my next build, and I noticed that they have these special edition motherboards, and those have a special paint job that's really cool, so you might find that interesting as well.
What's the seventh thing when picking out a motherboard?
I think the next thing you should do is, speaking of ASUS, pick a brand. Now, I like ASUS, but there are many other very competent brands out there. Look into those, and the best way to do that is to go into Amazon, search for the chipset and the socket that you have, and see what motherboards come up. Look at the different brands and see if one captures your fancy. Maybe it's by price, maybe it's by the way they look. And if you get one of those big brands, you're probably going to be okay. Some focus more on high-end motherboards, some focus on low-end motherboards.
What's the next thing in picking a motherboard?
Figure out what series of motherboards you want now that you have a brand picked out. And so what you want to do is go to Google and type the name of your brand, in my case ASUS, and then the word series meanings. And then you'll get some answers. You can either read the ones Google provides or go to the ASUS website or your brand name's website, which is probably gonna have the best descriptions, and find the one that works for you. Now, in my case, I almost always choose ROG, Republic of Gamers. ROG is for gamers, but if you have a problem like gamers have, needing lots of power, lots of CPU, lots of speed, those are really nice motherboards for that, but they're also really expensive motherboards. And the ninth thing you need to do, Di, figure out what motherboard you want within all of the criteria we just narrowed in.
Okay.
So go to the brand for that motherboard, like in my case, again, ASUS, and start going through the filters. Filter down to the series, the socket, the size, ATX, remember that?
Yes.
Figure out all those things, and then you hopefully will come up with a list. In most cases, you come down to maybe 20 or 15 motherboards to pick from. And then you can start picking from those, maybe go over to Amazon occasionally to look up the price. Maybe the prices, the retail prices are listed on the brand's website. But once you figure that out, then you can pick the motherboard that works for you. I like to pick 2 of them or 3 of them and compare them. And that's when I finally get to figure out, is this the right motherboard for me?
Okay.
Once you find the 2 or 3 that's right for you, double check the compatibility. While you're on the brand's website and you got that motherboard up, go figure out by clicking on the product support tabs and find out if you can. Most of them will list all the compatible CPUs.
Oh.
You want to make dang sure that motherboard you're picking and you're about to buy will work with the CPU you've already picked and want to buy. So do that next.
Okay.
Okay, so you've selected your motherboard. The next step is you're going to move on to the memory. If you watched our video on how to buy components for your new PC build, then you know you want to build a Hello World PC first. And picking out the CPU, motherboard, and memory are critical to that. So please subscribe to see that next video.
And thanks for watching, and please give us a thumbs up if you like the video.
And we'd love it if you share it with your friends as well. Thanks, guys.
Bye.